All right, y'all, we back with another video. So today, on this video, we're going to be talking about the newest character and obviously showcasing the newest character. So I'm pretty sure you kind of already guessed it. No, it's not Blue Todo. I do plan to do a video for him still, but the character that we're actually talking about is actually going to be Teen Gojo. So this is going to be the strongest blue Satoru Gojo from Hidden Inventory. Now, obviously this character, many people have been waiting for this character on global for like basically since forever. Literally since the game started, they've been waiting. And of course on JP, we've already had him for roughly about what, like half a year or so. So we already kind of know what he's capable of, his strengths, his weaknesses. Now, obviously, one thing to note is that he is a Gojo character, but he is going to function slightly different compared to other Gojo characters and just because of that alone, it kind of gives him a edge. Now, of course, in most scenarios when you're fighting, this kind of extra edge doesn't really matter too much because you're kind of trying to look to finish it off quickly, the fights, just because a lot of the enemies are very difficult and do a lot of damage, and like they'll literally kill the rest of your team. So obviously Gojo, he is powerful, but he can't just solo everything, right? So he still needs a team to complement him. Now, one thing I do want to put out there, obviously this is just my personal opinion on it, but I'd say Hollow Purple Gojo. Now, he may not hit as hard as Yellow Gojo. I'd say he's fairly close, and he's much simpler compared to this character, just because this character does have to, you kind of have to manage your turns correctly. You want to obviously get your max stacks of your buffs, and you have to use it through a big portion of the fight. And that's why I personally don't like him compared to like Hollow Purple Gojo, where Hollow Purple Gojo, you can just kind of use whatever the hell you want, and you only need one turn to set up. So literally just one turn, and then you can go straight into your O. So, but of course, just because he's so quick and easy to do things like that, his damage will never be on par with Teen Gojo. But in most cases, Hollow Purple Gojo is enough for a lot of content. Now, we're not here to talk about Hollow Purple Gojo. Let's actually start talking about Teen Gojo mainly, and then of course we're going to be going over his kit, my opinion on the character, what makes him so much better compared to all the other DPS characters in the game, and then of course we'll go into the showcase. Now, normally whenever I do showcases, I usually go with the formula of, you know, a regular team and then of course the nuke team. I think for Team Gojo's case, in the normal team and kind of like the nuke team, they're kind of almost the same because you still want to run him as a nuke in both, like literally standard team and literally the nuke team. So we're just going to showcase him like that. The normal team is his nuke team. That's how I see it for this character. Now you can run pure nuke team like using like domain Megami and all that good stuff, but that's a lot of unnecessary effort for a lot of cases where you're not even going to actually be doing that, right? So now let's actually talk about the skills. So we're going to start off with skill 1. So skill 1 is going to be Convergence and Strike. I'm going to put a disclaimer that obviously all my skills are level 8, so these aren't going to be the max skill stats. You're going to have more if you get them to 10. I just don't have the resources to do it. Well, I do, but I don't want to throw it into him just yet, because I'm waiting for my boy Geto, and he's one of my favorite characters, so I'm definitely going to be investing more into him than Gojo. I don't really care about Gojo's. Basically, as a Gojo character, all his skills practically cost no cursed energy, like they're just 1, so there's nothing to worry about there. Let's just start off with what skill 1 does, and that's going to deal melee hybrid damage to a target of 189% physical and then 144% curse, and then it's going to apply provocation, so basically taunt. They're gonna all be trying to attack him, which is good because he's a Gojo character and he does avoid damage, and it's a 35% chance though to proc it. Obviously, as you keep doing it over and over, the chance probably isn't going to be as high as it normally would. And of course, it says increases the ultimate gauge more than other skills. Now, I don't have the exact number on that. Now we have skill 2. So skill 2 is going to be the most important part of his entire kit on how you even play this character. So you can have the Limitless Curse technique. This is going to apply. So this skill is technically 2 different skills. So first off, this is how the skill looks before you have the condition to change it into his other skill. So you can have the Limitless Curse technique, and the Limitless Curse technique is going to apply attack nullification to yourself for 3 turns, applies 30% damage taken increase to self for 3 turns, and applies 5% curse technique increase special to self for 5 turns. can be used again after the curse technique increase special effect is removed. Now, the big thing to note here is the application of 5% curse technique increase special to yourself. This is essentially going to shift this skill into the other skill. So the other skill shows up when you have this buff active, which, since you'll have it for 5 turns, technically 4 because that turn will pass, you're going to obviously have the other skill. So now the other skill is going to be during the effect period of the curse technique increase special, which is obviously the buff that I just mentioned, right? Your skill will now change to disclosing the curse technique, and this is going to consume 1 curse energy after the change, so it's still the same, and it's going to apply 74% damage dealt increase to yourself for 4 turns, and then the 30% crit rate increase to yourself for 4 turns. The point is that you're going to be able to stack that damage dealt multiple times, and then when you go in for your ult, you're going to do a ton of damage. You're going to have high crit rate, so you do have a high chance of critting them too when you ult. It's just going to do tons and tons of damage. I would have to say, in terms of skill priority, his skill 2 and his ult would be the highest of priorities. Skill 3 you don't really need to upgrade, because skill 3, even though it does really good damage, at level 1 and at level 8 it still applies 30% damage decrease to them regardless. So you only really upgrade it if you just want the damage out of it. Then you have your ult. So your ult is going to be your main damaging skill, like your main damaging move overall, just because you're going to be using your skill 2 stacking and then going into your ult and then doing as much damage as possible. Skill 3 is for survivability. Skill 1 is just to obviously do a little bit of damage and taunt enemies if you're getting pressured hard. But yeah, this is going to be curse technique lapse, maximum cursed energy output blue, and this is going to deal ranged attack damage to all enemies equal to 1392% of curse technique, 5 hits total. Keep in mind this is only level 8 skill, so it goes a little bit higher. But yeah, 5 hits in total. So now let's talk about the passive, because the passive is going to be important. The passive is when battle starts, you apply attack nullification to yourself for 2 turns, and then 30% damage taken increase to self for 2 turns, but you're obviously not going to take any damage unless they're in their domain. And then of course you'll apply a 5% curse technique increase special to self for 4 turns, which means you don't need to activate your limitless curse technique. You're essentially going to be you're going to be starting off in your curse technique, disclose the curse technique, which means you're going to be able to do that, do the buffs that are going to be able to increase your damage output straight off in the beginning, because you'll have this applied to you literally at the start of the fight, which is good. But sometimes it's bad if you don't properly do it, right? So you usually want to make sure that you're using all these buffs in the right order, and you want to make sure you get your ult before you limitless curse technique. Now then, let's actually get into the teams, and then we will get into the actual showcase of the character. All right, so here's the team that we have. So the team is pretty standard. This is kind of like what you would run for all DPS characters anyways. Obviously, specific content, you'll definitely need to run other things. But I think with this team, you can kind of run this with Gojo, and you could practically stomp like almost a majority of the content. Of course, we have the 2 buffers, like the best buffers in the game currently. And then, of course, we do have Yuki as our sustain for cursed energy, and obviously buffing even further. So that way it helps you keep the uptime of, Momo and Yaga's buffs 100%. And then obviously you have Gojo as your main damage dealer, which if you need to taunt, you can alleviate some of the pressure on your team. If you know an enemy does AoE attacks, you can just use his skill 3, so that way you can just reduce the damage they do, since he's not going to be the only one getting hit. And then obviously he's going to be dealing a lot of damage. Now you don't need another DPS, because literally Gojo will do it all. He is the DPS. He will do it all. He will destroy everything. He is that powerful. Now there's one thing to note about this Gojo though, is there's a bunch of different options that you could actually use with him. You don't necessarily need to use non-standard. I like using non-standard just because it helps him charge his ult a lot faster. But obviously you can use Pride. Now of course you have to keep in mind with Pride is that you can't really use your other skills. You can only use his skill 2, just because how you stack Pride is obviously using skills that's either buffs and doesn't actually do damage, or using a skill that only does physical damage, right? And since this first skill does a combination of both, it will use the actual total count of the actual Pride. right? And then obviously if it leaves, then you won't be able to stack it. And then obviously the same thing with skill 3, which it does use curse technique, so this will count for the actual count of pride, which means you can lose it that way. But you can stack pride on him. You just have to continuously keep spamming his skill 2. Like, he's literally by far the hardest hitter. Just using pride and then using his buffs, he's literally the hardest hitter in the entire game. Now, obviously, if you need survivability, you can run under characters like Hanami, etc. But obviously, in this case, this is going to be a showcase for Gojo. And most of the time, you really don't even need survivability because you literally have Gojo reducing the amount of damage you take. Obviously, taunting the enemies. It's like, yeah, this is your team, bro. This is your team for a lot of things. Now, you don't need Momo. You could use Nanami, of course, too. But obviously, I had Momo, and Momo is way better than Nanami. So, anyways, without further ado, we're going to be showcasing the character, and we're going to be doing it in the Todo EX2 fight. I normally would do it in Tower, but I haven't really progressed on Global for Tower. All right, so we have our team here. I'm not going to talk too much about, you know, the others aside Gojo. We're just going to be highlight straight on Gojo, just because obviously you should already understand how this team functions with these 3 characters, with of course the 2 buffers and Yuki regenerating our curse energy. So there's not really much to highlight or talk about with these characters. They're just going to continuously spam this through the entire fight. Use some curse energy regen on Yuki, and then obviously we're going to use so there's obviously three options here. We do have our skill 2. As you can see, it's the other skill version, because as soon as he comes into the fight, he applies the special increase to himself, which changes his skills to the disclosing the curse technique, which means now he can buff himself and buff his damage output. So you do have to play around that. And then here we're just going to reduce the amount of damage he does. We dodge that. Buff. Attack. Skill 3. Alright, very nice. So he's broken. Buff. Skill 3. Attack. Okay, so I think the first one that we get rid of here is Momo, just because Momo is kind of annoying. Literally just going to be tedious for no reason. So we're just going to get rid of Momo. We're just going to pull her ass over here with this. Alright, get her out of the way. Not bad. Then we buff. We break her, and then we kill Miwa. Alright, very nice. Now we just buff. Curse energy regen. And then we go into limitless curse technique. Buff. We do not want to attack because we will kill. So we'll just use defense barrier. And then we'll buff, right? So this will be our first buff. So you want to get 3 of them, right? Because we only have how many turns left? 1 damage dealt. Another damage dealt. Yeah. I have 3 turns left on it. So we want to, of course, buff 2 more times. So we do this. And then barrier onto... Doesn't matter who. But just to be safe, we'll do it onto Yaga just because he's a little bit low. And then we'll use our skill 2 again. So this will be our second buff. He's got evasion. Let me see how much the evasion is. 1 time. That's fine. We can buff. We can attack just to kind of get rid of the evasion. And then buff 1 more time with Gojo. buff, buff, attack, and then buff again with skill 2. You're probably wondering, why am I doing all this? I want to make sure I have all my max stacks, buffs, and everything for all my characters, and obviously all of Gojo's, right? So now, as you can see, I literally have all the buffs active, literally all of them. So this is going to be my max damage output here. So we're just going to do a buff real quick. We're going to buff again, this time with Wasp. Then we're going to be using Yuki with his ult, and of course the memory to increase damage dealt. And then we're going to use Gojo's, we're going to use non-standard, and then of course, you know, the ultimate. Now, when I think about it, maybe I could have possibly used Pride, maybe if I did it early, since I didn't really attack with him in the second phase. And then yeah, we're going to use his ult, and then we're just going to cook these frogs. So let's see how that damage output looks. I ain't even gonna hold you. I don't even know how much damage that was. What was that, like 6 million? 6 million. I mean, keep in mind it's also an AoE attack. I mean, that's pretty good damage, bro. Like, obviously, if I was using like a character that can like debuff the enemy and increase the amount of damage that they take, I would get way more damage too. Like, if I use someone like Domain Megami, I could get higher numbers, way higher numbers. But yeah, like that's you know, Team Gojo for you. He takes like no damage. He literally dodges everything. When he does get hit, it doesn't really matter because you can reduce their damage that they do to you. He can taunt the enemies to alleviate pressure from the rest of your team. If you're fighting like an enemy who can have like single target ults, just taunt him before they ult. And yeah, the good thing about him that everybody loves, of course, is that he doesn't leave the fight, because every other Gojo leaves the fight. Not this one though. He stays with you till the bitter end. Anyways, that's going to be the Gojo showcase. I really enjoy playing the character, but I wouldn't say he's one of my favorite characters to use. I definitely like using Hollow Purple Gojo more than him, but he definitely is a very powerful character indeed, regardless of that. And I'm just waiting for Geto though.